Good morning. My name is Lance French. I'm the Business Development Manager for W&M Environmental, a division of Braun Intertech, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar of Industrial Hazardous Waste, Waste Rules and Changes. I've already messed it up. So Kyle, so you're in your company. Our experts today are W&M's Division Manager Jennifer Adams and Kyle Artrip. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. You can say thank you.
Thanks, Lance.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us,
Thank
Lance.
you. Thank you. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please send them through your GoToWebinar chat window. If we don't get to your questions, I'll make sure that Jennifer and Kyle sees them and we'll get an answer to you as soon as possible. We are recording this webinar and will be available to rewatch on our website soon, along with the slides, and we will send you an email with a link when they're made available. So let's get to it. Let's introduce our guest today. So Jennifer Adams is a graduate of A&M, Texas A&M, of course, because everybody here at W&M is from A&M. She's worked in the ready-mix aggregate cement industry for 8 years. So Jennifer, you want to kind of expand on your experience for our audience?
Sure. So I worked for a concrete company, and my focus was environmental compliance. So there are quite a few little ready-mix plants around Texas, and my job, my job was to make sure they followed all the environmental rules. And now here at W&M, I've been here almost 5 years, and I'm the division manager here in the Austin office.
Excellent. So Kyle, I have to make it. You are the very handful of people that are not from Texas A&M. So you're actually from Idaho. How did you go from Idaho to here? Maybe that's another story, but tell us about your experience as well.
Oh yeah, I've kind of lived all over. Originally from Houston, but yeah, I guess back. I made my way back. I've about the last decade, I've worked mostly in industry, doing environmental compliance, specifically hazardous waste management. Most recently, I came from an emergency response company and waste broker located up in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. My industry experience includes semiconductor manufacturing, ammunition, aerospace, and some oil and gas as well. So
you've dealt with some waste.
Yeah,
some hazardous. Excellent. Okay, so here's going to be the topics that we're going to cover, and I would read them to you, but I'm not going to do that. If you want me to read them to you, I guess you can email me and we can get that to you. So, but these are the things we're going to cover for today. So, I guess Kyle, are you taking the first question, or is that Jennifer?
So I wanted to just give a quick little background on why we decided to talk about waste today. Several reasons. Obviously, the EPA back in 2017 came out with the new generator improvement rules, so we're definitely going to go into that. And then we have seen an increase. We've gotten actually more calls recently thanks to inspections, waste inspections from the TCEQ. So we've had several clients have. There seems to be there's more. Now it's my turn to trip over my words. More focus on waste, industrial waste at the TCEQ. So we will start with a background on Texas. First RCRA rules and Texas rules, and then lead into the generator improvement rules. I know Kyle here has a lot of experience in states that have already implemented the rule. Unlike Texas, Texas is still working through it. So he has some great examples that he's going to share with us. So there you go. Here's the history of RCRA.
Yeah, so we're not going to go the whole history, but mainly just the whole goal of RCRA really is just protect human health and environment from potential hazards of waste disposal. It's also, conserving energy and natural resources, reducing the amount of waste generated, and ensuring that wastes are managed in an environmentally sound manner. Prior to 1976, there really wasn't a whole lot of rules that really it was kind of, I guess, a little bit of Wild West out there. A lot of illegal dumping. I'm sure you've heard of the Love Canal and situations like that. So yeah, that's really the intent of RCRA. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretty much dive into go over just a little bit of a brief background, and as well as some Texas regulations, and then we're going to jump into the generator improvement rules.
So in 1964, it was do whatever you want with your waste. Just throw it anywhere. We don't care.
Well, that's what we're assuming. Let's just start there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to discuss is just the general definitions, requirements, like I said, the Texas regulations, specifically under RG22, commonly cited violations that we've seen, and just a few examples. So I guess really first question, so what's a solid waste?
So solid waste, when you hear that word, that phrase, solid waste, you think, big blocks of something, or honestly, when I hear hazardous waste, I used to think of green goo. But to go back to solid waste, there is a multi-page definition in the rules, so we're not going to go through that lovely multi-page definition for you, but I will highlight the fact that the word solid in there does not mean your waste has to be solid. It can cover a large variety of different types of industrial waste, including liquids.
And one thing you have to do is, if you do determine that you have a solid waste and that it is hazardous, you're going to make sure you're characterizing it correctly. So you got to make sure you do a waste determination, and this must be made at the point of generation. EPA is very clear on that. It can't be after you've mixed it with something later on down the road, or you've done something else. It's when it's generated. That's when you need to make that determination. What's the point? It's to make sure the proper waste identification's made, proper handling and management from cradle to grave. I'm sure you've heard that term out there, and also just to make sure it's compliant with land disposal restrictions.
So I'm going to throw you a little bit. So when you said cradle to grave, so there may be somebody out there that doesn't fully understand what that means. Can you explain that just a little bit more in detail?
Sure. Cradle grave, basically it's from the point of generation, as we discussed. So let's say as soon as you've determined that it is a waste, it no longer has usable, and you no longer use it as a product, recycle it, or anything such. It is a waste. It's tracking that from point of generation all the way until it has been properly disposed of.
But you still own it once it's even disposed of. Is that correct?
It is. I have a good example that actually my last company, we got a notification that we were brought in as a potentially responsible party on a Superfund site because of some used oil we disposed of in the 80s, I think, at a site in Houston. The disposal site was not disposing of everyone's oil properly, so anyone they could track down who disposed of oil at that site in the last 20, 30 years was a potentially responsible party for a Superfund cleanup.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even that you disposed of it correctly, still...
We think you thought you did, but the disposal facility didn't. It's still your waste.
It's still your waste.
Okay. So it's important to do your due diligence, of course, when you're selecting your waste brokers and your disposal sites.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Sorry to take you off of your group.
Oh, no worries. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and jump to the next slide here and talk about just the generator categories. Some of you may or may not be aware of what you currently are at your facility. But there's the CSQIG, conditionally exempt small quantity generator. With generator improvement rules, it's been recently changed to a very small quantity generator, but it's the same thing. It hasn't changed. And that's if you generate less than 220 pounds of hazardous waste per calendar month. Or less than 2.2 pounds of acutely hazardous waste, your P and U listed waste, and then your small quantity, anything between greater than 220 and less than 220 pounds per month, and then of course your large quantity, anything above the 2,200 pounds per month, and there's different requirements that go with that for each one of those. For each one of those, large quantity being the greatest or the larger amount of requirements that we'll discuss a little bit here with the generator improvement rules.
I will say for tracking, obviously it's important to track how much you generate per month. We've created spreadsheets and other ways that clients can track waste. Kyle, with your broker background, what have you seen? What's your best, the best way that you've seen to track?
Well, honestly, the best way I've seen for sites is to have a central point of contact, having one person that that's their responsibility. They're properly trained, they understand the regulations, they understand what's required, and they have a desire to make sure things are done the right way. I've seen where if you have multiple people involved, you can do that, but sometimes things can get lost or confusing. Or if you depend on your operators, say if you have let's say you manufacture propane tanks and you have multiple people that are responsible for maintaining the waste. Sometimes people will put stuff in different places around the site, and they don't have a central accumulation area. So it's important, I think, to have a point of contact, a qualified individual that can manage that. I found has been the best.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So next we're going to talk about just Texas regulations. They things break down a little bit further here in Texas. I worked mostly in the Pacific Northwest and the Mountain West. Waste coding and everything was a little bit different to me when I moved down here, but I've quickly come up to speed. And here in Texas, you have your hazardous waste. You're listed in characteristic waste, and then you also have another category for you have your non-hazardous industrial waste. An example of that for a non-hazardous industrial solid waste would be, say, you have a mining operation or a smelting chemical or, say, a petroleum plant that you generate waste that you do your analytical testing or based on process knowledge. It's not exactly it's not hazardous. It doesn't exceed T-clip values, or it's not characteristically hazardous, but it's still hazardous enough that it can still be considered say a class 1 industrial waste, a class 2 or class 3. So you're probably wondering, if you're not familiar, what is a class 1 waste here in Texas? Example would be, say, a water contaminated with ethylene glycol is a good example. Or you say you have a TPH value of something that's greater than 1500. That'd be another example. Say a class 2 waste, example would be, say, waste activated sludge from biological treatment plant. And then the lower category, the class 3, is say materials such as rock, brick, glass, dirt.
Inert material.
Yeah, inert materials really be class 3. And with that, you also have, you see there on the side, your non-industrial waste or municipal waste. That's waste that's generated from, say, amusement parks, restaurants, commercial offices, your auto dealerships. It's not considered industrial. It still should be properly managed, but doesn't fall into the class 1, 2, or 3 categories.
I am relieved that there's no industrial hazardous waste in our restaurants. I just want to say thank you for that.
A little warm fuzzy there.
Yeah, so it makes me feel a little better.
Then the last thing, so with your class 1 and 2, 3 waste, or your hazardous waste, you here in Texas, aside from your EPA waste code, so your, for instance, say your D002 for corrosive waste, you'd also, here in Texas, you have your your specific waste code for Texas. So, for instance, you have your sequence number. And what that does, identifies a waste. It's assigned by the generator, so it's a 4-digit number you can give it for your waste, or sometimes it's assigned by TCEQ. And then your next would be your 3-digit form code. It indicates the type of waste, and those types are in RG22. So if you can reference that, TCEQ should have that website.
For those of you that don't know, because I didn't know for the longest time working in Texas, RG22 is basically your waste generating Bible in Texas.
Mm-hmm. And then your last is your 1-digit code at the end. So if it's hazardous, you'd have an H designation, or if it's a class 1, 2, or 3, it's obviously be a 1, 2, or 3 at the very end. And so you gotta include that on your disposal manifest, as well as your RCRA waste code.
So here's a question. So I know we have a lot of listeners that might not be in Texas. So what Bible should they go to?
They should go to their state agency's website and do some searching on there. Most state agencies have a pretty good resource for the rules that are applicable in that state.
Okay.
So the next slide we're going to focus on is just some commonly cited violations that we've seen, and I have seen in industry quite a bit. One of the big ones, it's really easy to do, is you're having improperly labeled containers. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about having a qualified individual that knows how to label, what to look for, and then how to correct that if they do find an issue, especially if they're doing their weekly inspections and they're looking for those type of things. So yeah, an easy one is someone doesn't write the accumulation date, the date that they started filling their waste drum. So making sure that that's on there, and also making sure that they're clearly communicating the hazard on the drum as well. It says hazardous waste if it is hazardous. They're not writing has waste, used oil, but it's not actually hazardous waste. There's just a lot of, I've seen a lot of different things where people just start slapping placards on
Yeah.
a drum, and they'll put a, say, a class 6, or say it's toxic, and it's flammable, but they just think they have to put something on there. So it's good to have that qualified individual or persons to do that. Another one we've seen a lot is are open containers. And this one's really easy to do. People get busy when they're working, and they say, okay, well, I'm going to go dump this. I've got this used solvent here. Let's go dump it in the drum, and then I'm going to get back to what I'm doing. And they'll dump it in there, and then they'll just set the lid on top. That's it's definitely an easy one to get cited for right there. So yeah, just make sure that the lid's on there and it's closed. If you have one of the screw lids, just make sure you've got a few of the screws or the
whatever bolts.
The bolts in there. That they're just tightened, So it's closed. If someone was to knock it over accidentally, it's not gonna spill all out. And then you can see we've got some other ones here. Incomplete training records. That's an easy one. You spend all the money to send your employees for training. You feel like you're doing the right thing, but inspector comes and you can't produce that information. You have no idea the last time that Jim or Jill or whoever was trained. You say, oh yeah, they've had it, but okay, well, when, how often?
Right. Maybe
it was 10 years ago. Maybe you have training records, but nobody still works at your site that's on there. So those are easy. That's an easy one. And then you can see some of the other ones. Exceeding your central accumulation area storage limit. So making sure that you're disposing of things correctly within the date that allowed, if say you're a small quantity or large quantity generator. And then some of the other ones, incomplete records, erroneous records. So let's say you get your manifest back from the disposal facility and you just toss it in the garbage.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah.
They're really hard to track when you throw them away.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just some of the common ones that we've seen a lot of.
And I'd like to emphasize, well, there's two things really that go along with following the hazardous waste rules. I know one of the things is understanding what you really have on site. So I would kind of recommend at least annual, I'm putting audit here in air quotes, audit or inspection to kind of dig in and put on your inspector glasses. I like to use, different sets of glasses. I'm putting on my inspector glasses because, you're at a site every day. You sort of forget, you get used to things. You see them every day, you get used to them. So it's important to go in there with fresh eyes and take a look around, because I can't tell you how many times I've been on a site and I've asked them what kind of industrial waste they have, and they say, oh, well, we don't really have any waste except for regular trash. And then you point to various things, and you're not thinking in that mind frame, and you realize that you do actually have some industrial waste. And even on sites where you have a really good handle on what waste you are generating, it's real easy to miss things. I know of a client, it's a big operation. They had a really good handle on their big waste generating activities, but there's this little small operation that's not really, I wouldn't consider it a part of the main production operation. They went and inspected this smaller operation and realized that there was a small amount of hazardous waste being generated every month at this site within the site, basically. So it's things like that to remind yourself that you do get used to things, and it's great to.
And I'm sure not to even, you have to associate a cost too if it's not classified correctly, because you could have somebody, if when in doubt it's hazardous, and just throwing some stuff in that could take you to a higher level of.
Sure. Yeah. An example that I have that I think of. I was working with a company that had natural gas compressor stations all over the Mountain West, and their environmental coordinator. He was stationed in one city, but he had facilities in multiple states, and he was assuming that used oil was going into the used oil tank and that it would then be recycled. So he he contracted a company out to come out and pump that used oil out, and unfortunately, it wasn't exactly used oil. It was paint, gasoline. Sometimes the guys would scrape stuff up off the ground, so they'd spill something and they put it in there. And that all of a sudden, once they tested it, it came back as hazardous because it had metals, because the background soil concentration had a lot of.
Yeah, because then once something is not hazardous and you put it in with hazardous, then it becomes hazardous, right?
So, and that's expensive.
Yeah. So
so just knowing what's going on, knowing what your operators are doing, and is important.
And then planning.
So I have a question from the audience. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So Nile Prajapati asks, how do you determine if disposal facility disposed of my facility's hazardous waste properly?
That's a great question. So we recommend, and we did this back when I was in industry, actually doing audits, doing your own audit of your disposal facility, and they expect that. You won't be the only ones doing that kind of audit, just to make sure, ask questions, check their records, do your due diligence, keep records of your inspection to make sure that you, as far as you can tell and determine, they are disposing of your waste properly.
Yeah, and a lot of them will have, they'll even have because this happens so much that they'll have packets and they'll have stuff already prepared for you. So a lot of times they can just send it to you. Maybe you can set up a time to come out and look. If you start to get some pushback from them,
that might be a red flag.
It might be a big red flag to maybe start looking elsewhere.
Yeah, if they're not transparent, then that probably means they're not disposing of your waste properly. It's a good question.
Thank you.
So I want to add one more thing here before we jump into the new rules, kind of in line with common violations and understanding that your processes, future maintenance work. We had a client that was going to repaint some buildings on site, so they sandblasted. And as you know, a lot of older paint is lead-based, so they had drums of the sandblast media and paint and all the debris and everything, and it came back as hazardous because of lead. And that was obviously a real expensive disposal cost. So we did some research and realized that you can get sandblast media that encapsulates lead. They make that for this very reason. So on the next site they used that media. It encapsulated the lead. The test came back below levels, and they were able to dispose of it as non-hazardous waste. So that's along with just your regular operations, just day-to-day maintenance thing. And I think that's where going back to Kyle's, your one point of contact who's trained. That's really important to have. So.
Okay, I have one more question before we get into the rules. So, can TCEQ come into your facility, find some undocumented hazardous waste, figure out how much you've actually generated, then actually go back in time that says, hey, you've actually been generating this for X amount of time, and then fine you because of that, even though I didn't know that was doing this for 20 years?
That is possible. That has happened. If they can figure out your generation date, and this is not just for waste, this is for a lot of different rural areas, you can be fined on a daily basis. Daily. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that can be scary. You better know what's going on.
You better know what's going on. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Take it away, Kyle.
Okay.
Sorry.
So next, what we're going to talk about, we're going to highlight some of the generator improvement rules. There were over 60 changes to the current regulations, but what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what the most stringent parts that you'll probably see as a generator here in Texas once TCEQ adopts the regulation, and then we're going to talk about some of the less stringent improvements that could be adopted. We're not going to obviously speak for TCEQ on what will and will not be adopted, but we can at least highlight those just in case. If they are, then you can go ahead and start using those as the regulation applies. So why did they implement generator improvement rules? Why did EPA do this? Well, mostly it was to strengthen and also clarify the existing regulation. They noticed there were a few gaps in there in the regulation that wasn't very clear, and they wanted reorganized to make it more user friendly for users, and they also want to provide some flexibility to industry with some of these improvements, and we're gonna discuss a couple of those here in just a bit. So when is TCEQ going to implement this? We're not entirely sure. The last we heard was possibly fall of 2020. But we'll go ahead and look here at some of the states here that have already implemented and adopted the rule. As you can see, there's still quite a few they're still working through this. So as of September of this month, or as of this month. So yeah, don't worry, we're not the last at all. It's there's actually just a handful that have completely adopted it. Like I said, I was fortunate to work in those Mountain West states that did pretty quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss next some of the more stringent parts of the regulation. So one of them is small quantity generators have to re-notify every 4 years using the EPA 8712 form. We showed that just a little bit ago. So yeah, that's required to be submitted September 1st of each year that the re-notification is required. I think that will go into, that's supposed to go into play in 2021. So if we adopt this here in Texas next fall, then I believe that should go into effect then. Also, one is new labeling requirements for hazardous waste containers. Now, I guess back up and don't worry that this new labeling requirement's you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of extra labels and it's going to cost you a lot of money. A lot of you may already be doing this correctly, but the intent of the new labeling requirements is just so that hazards are they're better communicated to workers, emergency responders, and your waste handlers. And it's actually pretty good. What it does is it gives you some flexibility on what you can do. So you may already be doing this by putting your DOT labels. Say if you have an acid that you dispose of, and you may put on there, hazardous waste, your waste codes and everything like that. But you also put on the USD corrosive Class 8 label on the side. That's what this regulation wants you to do, is just to keep doing that. If you aren't, you have some options. You can put those you can buy some of those labels, put those on there in addition to your hazardous waste label. You can also use hazard statement or pictogram OSHA has, and then you can also use the NFPA chemical hazard label as well. So there is some flexibility. You just have to make sure you clearly communicate what the hazard is to the person that could possibly come in contact with it. And then the last one is biannual reporting for entire year, not just for the months. The generator was, say if you're LQG, not just for the months for that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to, I skipped over one, I apologize. Contingency plan requirements. So this is a big one, but not really. So if you're a large quantity generator, you should have a contingency plan in place. With the rule change, you're also required to add a quick reference guide to that, and it's really good. What it is it's a quick reference that emergency responders should have, that where they know the hazards on your site, the locations of the hazards, how much of the hazardous material that you have, location of water supply, and contact information for say your emergency coordinator in charge at the site. Information that's already in the plan, but this just consolidates it down to just a couple of pages, or even you could probably even fit it onto one page if you were able to do that. And it's something that you will then provide to your local emergency responders. And with that, it's also, I guess, one benefit too is if you already have an existing contingency plan, you can implement this when you go to update your plan. It doesn't have to be done immediately. If you're a new large quantity generator, you'll have to add these in there. And there's 8 elements to it, and you can find that within the regulation. But a lot of that you probably already have in your existing contingency plan. So next we're going to talk about the less stringent regulations. So one of the
Real quick, Kyle,
Sure.
less stringent in TCEQ world means they may or may not.
Sure. Yeah. So these may not be implemented by the state, but if they are, there are some benefits to that. And
These are good changes.
yeah,
in other words,
these are good changes for industry. One of the ones that caught my attention, because I used to work at a site that could have benefited from this, is the C-squid consolidation to an LQG. So with this, let's say that you operate a manufacturing facility, and let's say across the street you have a separate site, separate address that is just a small lab, and you accumulate, I don't know, let's just say you accumulate maybe 50 pounds of, say, an acidic solution or a flammable solution from your lab there. With this new change, you can consolidate that waste at your LQG site as long as you do the following. You notify the state 30 days prior to doing this activity, to transporting or transferring your C-squig waste to the LQG and consolidating. You maintain your records, and you make sure you transfer your accumulation date. So let's say if you generated this waste, your C-squig waste on September 1st, you moved it over to your site, say November 20th, and you put it into a drum that was empty. Well, you have to make sure that date from September 1st is transferred to the drum at the LQG.
So you can't use the date that you transfer. You have to use the date it was generated.
Yep.
Okay.
So accumulation dates follow, but this is beneficial. I used to work at a facility that was similar to that, where they had a site across the street had a separate EPID number, or actually it was a separate address, and we could have benefited from doing that instead of having to maintain two separate sites. And that's one benefit. Another one is the episodic generation. We're going to go into that a little bit more here in a bit, but this allows basically for you to have an event where you would generate waste that exceeds your normal generator status without you actually having to change your generator status. And we'll go into the details of that here in just a bit. And then one of the last ones is the 50-foot setback requirement. So this is a waiver. An issue that the EPA was noticing a lot was there's a lot of generators that were, say, in urban areas or industrial areas that were pretty compact, and they were having a hard time meeting the 50-foot facility property line requirement for ignitable and reactive waste. With this allows, say, if you're an LQG, to petition a fire marshal and possibly the state to apply for a waiver that you don't have to maintain that 50-foot buffer. So that can help you out quite a bit if you're able to get that approved. So what we're going to talk about are planned versus unplanned events. So I guess a good example I can think of here is, let's say you have a site and you operate as a small quantity generator, and you don't really generate more than 2,200 pounds a month, but you have a tank on site that's used in process that you have to clean out. You've got a bad product, or it just hasn't been cleaned out for years, and you're starting to notice that it's affecting your product that you're making. With the episodic generation, you can submit you can submit 30 days prior to the event that you're planning to exceed the amount of waste that you'll generate in that current month without exceeding your generator status for that time period. And then for an unplanned would be, and I'll go into that a little bit more here in the next slide. And then an unplanned event would be, let's say that you have an accidental spill, as you can see in this picture here, or a production upset that generates quite a bit of waste, or you have, say, a natural disaster, flooding, a hurricane, that all of a sudden now you've got all this water that's contaminated with a product or something. You have to dispose of it, and you didn't anticipate this at all. This will probably never happen again, or very rarely. So this is a benefit of that. So we'll go into a little bit more details here on the episodic generation rule.
I have a quick question, Kyle,
Sure.
on planned versus unplanned. I know you're going to go into more detail, but I think you were sharing the other day about someone who was trying to label an unplanned event as, or no,
Yeah.
a planned event as an unplanned event. Why would that happen?
Well, so let's say that on your end, if you're a facility and you didn't plan appropriately, and you have to do some kind of say a tank clean out, and you're gonna, or for instance, if you're a pipeline and you're gonna clean out a section of pipeline and you're gonna generate quite a bit of contaminated water and you're gonna put it into a frac tank, and you say, oh, I didn't make proper notifications, I didn't do, can I do this as unplanned because I didn't plan for the pipe to be this dirty and that it was going to be hazardous. So can I just call this unplanned? Well, you can't, because it doesn't. You planned for this. It wasn't a spill. It wasn't an accident. You planned to do this maintenance.
Yeah.
So what you would have to do is you'd have to push that out, say 30 days, the activity that would generate this waste. Submit your notifications, get approval.
Yeah, because an unplanned sounds like something bad happened and there was a reason why I couldn't notify you before.
Yeah.
And a planned actually is something that we know that it's going to generate extra waste.
And you can't say the pipe was too dirty or dirtier than you expected and call it unplanned, right? Yeah.
That's what the facility was trying to do. They were trying to say, well, we didn't expect it to be hazardous. And
right.
Well,
okay,
but
so
you generated this. You knew you were going to generate this. So.
Okay, so yeah, so in that case, yeah, they were wanting to do it because they didn't notify prior to, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think I went ahead. Sorry.
No,
so
no
you
problem.
only get one planned and one unplanned a year.
Well,
so would that play a part of it?
So how it is now is you're allowed one episodic event per year, but you can petition to get a second episodic event. So you're allowed one planned and one unplanned if your petition is approved. So let's say you planned for this tank clean out and that was approved and you're okay, great, that's your episodic event for the year. But then a couple months later you had a big flood that then washed out, say, another tank that had a bunch of product. You could petition then that this was an unplanned event, and if it was approved by your state regulatory agency, then that you could also get that as well. But you can't get two unplanned events or you can't get two planned events. You can't say, okay, well, I'm going to do this maintenance this month, and then I'm going to wait till, October or November, and then I'm going to do this one, and I'm going to also say it was planned. By that point, you'd have to change your generator status.
So I would think that they wouldn't want it to be unplanned because you don't know what's going to be ahead. So then you've already used your unplanned. Well, I guess you can get more than one unplanned, but.
Well, you shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, you just don't know. The unplanned is
Hopefully, you don't have more than one unplanned in a year.
I hope so, but but that's what I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to use it on something that if there is weather, whatever.
So, sure, you have a question?
We have another audience question. They're asking, if your site is regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission and you have an episodic event, do you anticipate the TRRC will follow suit and adopt the rule along with TCEQ?
That's a really good question, and I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but we can dig into that and get back to you. Let me not try to answer that now. I have my thoughts, but I may be wrong. So
Right, great.
we'll look into it. That's a great question.
That's a good question. So, on these episodic events, as you can see, there are a few things that you have to do. You have to make notification either 30 days prior, as I said, or within 72 hours of an unplanned event. If you're a CSQIG and you don't currently have an EPID number, a lot of them don't, you'll have to get one. So you'll have to also submit application or your appropriate form to your state regulatory agency to have one issued. And you must finish the episodic event within 60 days of starting. Now, I have heard that you can petition your state regulatory agency to see if you can get an extension, but typically it's pretty set, 60 days. And this is for, you should, within 60 days, a lot of times you should have this
Everything cleaned up. Yeah.
Yeah. There could be some rare cases.
Within 60 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I read that wrong. I was thinking, how can you give it a 60-day notice of an unplanned event?
Right. But it's the shipping and waste, right? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's limited to one episodic event per year, given if you can petition for a second one. And then implementation, yeah, like I said, may vary by state. So your state may be more stringent and say, no, we prefer you to have to change your generator status. Okay, so yeah, like I said, you submit your 8712 form. You can see here, we'll go on and go to the next slide here. So you planned or unplanned. It's actually a pretty nice little form. You just fill out your information, send that in. Depending on your agency, you should get a response back fairly quickly. And also obtain an EPA number if you're a C-squig or like I said, very small quantity generator. So we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide here. So along with that, say once you are issued the approval for episodic generation, you must label your containers with as episodic waste. So clearly, if it's a tank or a drum, say episodic waste, and you must put the date that the event occurred or that you started your episodic event. So that say the day you were going to you started cleaning your tank out and generating that waste, or the day that you started excavating because you spilled due to an unplanned event. You also must maintain inventory logs. You have to track your waste still. Make sure you know how much you are generating, and you have to keep those records for 3 years. So keep your manifest, the dates that you generate these waste streams. You have to hold on to that. You can't say, oh, it's episodic, it's gone, don't have to worry about it anymore. Which may be kind of challenging if you're not used to doing that. If you're a C-squig, you may not have something in place, but you'll need to do that if you do take advantage of this.
So, what's the major change of the episodic event? What was it before that? Did you have unlimited episodic, or you only had one, or?
Well, it did not exist.
It didn't exist. Okay. Yeah, and in the states I've worked in, typically you submit a form and you'd have to change your generator status for that time period.
And so if you had to change to large quantity, then technically for that month you'd have to follow all the rules, including contingency plan and inspections, weekly inspections. There's a large chunk of regulation that goes along with increasing to large quantity generators. So this would be very helpful on a one-time basis to not have to do that.
Yeah. So that's the greatest benefit, really, is just like what Jennifer just said. With those. So we'll jump to the things. Does anybody have any questions so far in the chat?
Yeah, we did have a question. Let me just pull it up here. Okay, what is the best source or place to look for trainings and certifications to have a person or few people best prepared for all these requirements?
That's a really good question, and it actually kind of ties into this slide here. TCEQ and EPA obviously have a wealth of information. Not to plug our own training, but on the next slide you'll see we have 2 hazardous waste training classes coming up in October, and I promise this question was not a plant. I promise.
It was going to be.
It was going to be, but no, we really do offer, we're going to offer 2 full-day hazardous waste training classes in October coming up, and then so besides your state TCEQ, other state EPA website, there are quite a few companies out there that do long, in-depth training on hazardous waste. But I think understanding your state rules is obviously going to be your first step, and then getting some sort of training to help explain what those mean in context, that kind of thing. Hope that helps. So real quick, a rundown of these. Like we said, we're thinking fall 2020 is when the TCEQ will finalize the implementation of these new rules, and you can check for updates on their IHW news website. And I will say it's way more than just news on this new rule. There's a lot of good information on things coming up in the IHW world and TCEQ. The second link is the EPA website. So the TCEQ is still referring people to the full EPA rule language on for more information on the generator rules. And there's some great FAQs here. And then of course you can go dig into the full multi-page rule there. And then this last link is great if you're going to have a TCEQ investigation. This is very helpful kind of preparation for that kind of thing. And the next slide actually has the details on our 2 trainings that are coming up in Dallas and Houston.
Yeah, the great thing about those is that it is obviously it's an 8-hour class, and you get, and Lori Siegelman is the instructor. You can ask. It's really good because you can ask specific questions about your specific sites, and we've had 18 people in there, and they're all doing their little assignments, and Lori's right there to help walk them through. So it's a great benefit as well. So if you are interested in taking this class, there's the links, and contact me on my email lfrench@braunenertech.com, and I'll give you a special webinar discount for taking the class in Dallas and Houston.
And I will say, I 5 years ago when I first started here at W&M, I sat in on one of these classes, and Lori does a really, really good job. There's hands-on examples. You're not just sitting there listening to someone talk for 8 hours. It's a great class.
I learned a lot, and that
says a lot.
That's saying a lot. Very funny.
All right. Any more web questions?
Okay. Yes. So, did you say VSEG? I think it's VSEG.
VSWIG.
VSWIG. Okay. VSWIG can send to a large quantity generator?
So yes, under the the less stringent generator improvement rules, yes, that is something that can be done if you have a central site that is a large quantity generator, and you have some smaller labs that are within the area that where it makes sense for you. You can certainly do that, and it may save you on disposal costs just for the transportation itself.
And I'd like to highlight it has to be the same owner operator for sure. You can't just send it to your neighbor who.
It has to be under the same control of the same. Yeah. You can't help your neighbors out, unfortunately.
And could you go over the benefit of using an episodic event one more time? Sure.
Yeah. Definitely the benefit is you don't have to change your generator status. So with that, say if you were a C-squig jumping up to a large quantity generator for a short amount of time, less than 60 days, you wouldn't have to, get the contingency plan in place. It might, still might be a good idea for you to do that type. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that because, it's still good to have those plans, but with the new requirements, you don't need to do that. So you don't do the weekly inspections, just less requirements. It's definitely business friendly because EPA understands that stuff does happen, acts of nature. Let's say that you're one example I can think of is your distribution center that you distribute chemicals for an auto manufacturer, and typically your shipments arrive fine. You don't have any products that are damaged, and then you just happen to get a truck that comes in and half the pallets are smashed up, and the trucker says, "That's not my problem, take it." And now all of a sudden you've jumped from conditionally exempt to you're a large quantity because you have, say, a bunch of naphtha or some kind, say a solvent, parts cleaning solvent that now you have to dispose of. And it's this, it's rare, but it does happen. So then you can plan for that.
Mm-hmm. Get rid of it without increasing your generator, jumping a generator status. Yep.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions we have for today. So then our next webinar is in October. We're already in October already. So we're going to be, if there's anybody out there in the medical field, we're going to be actually doing a webinar on hazardous waste for hospital campuses. So they've done some rule changes as well. Daryl Ullman's been an expert in that field for, I haven't looked at his bio, but that's what his main focus is on. So it's going to be a great webinar as well. So, well, thank you guys very much for your time. I know these are always fun, and Kyle, you made it through. So now I can get you to do another one here soon. Jennifer, thank you as well for joining us. So again, just a reminder, we did record this webinar, and we'll have it posted on our website probably tomorrow, along with the slides. And we'll also put a link to those record chaining classes in case you did want to. Sometimes going through those links on a page is hard to do. So we'll have that link on that email as well. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great weekend. It's close enough. Bye-bye.